chief of the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee has slammed Chinese aggression against India along the line of actual control in Ladakh. Eliot Engel, the chief of the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee, has said in a press release that he's extremely concerned by the ongoing Chinese aggression along the line of actual control, that China is demonstrating once again that it is willing to bully its neighbors rather than resolve conflicts according to international law. Countries must all abide by the same set of rules so that we don't live in a world where might makes right. He then goes on to say, I strongly urge China to respect norms and use diplomacy and existing mechanisms to resolve its border questions with India. All right, joining us on that big story now, live from Washington, D.C., is Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Asia Program, Senior Associate for South Asia of the Wilson Center. Thank you very much, Mr. Kugelman, for joining us on Good Morning India. How significant do you see these comments and the fact that the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee has now taken note of them?
Well, it's very significant just because the U.S. Congress had been very quiet on this border spat. There had been really little, if anything, said by anyone on the Hill up to now. And on the whole, the U.S. government has been relatively quiet. Of course, we know that President Trump made a few comments last week. And then you had a very senior U.S. official, Alice Wells, who had been very critical of China in her comments. But that's really been it. So I think it's significant that you have Congress weighing in, and particularly someone as influential as Representative Engel, who is a friend of India's, and he also is someone that chairs a very influential, very important committee in the House of Representatives. So I think in that regard, it's significant that you have a broader contingent of folks within the U.S. government that want to be out there commenting on a spat. Typically, the U.S. would be relatively quiet on this issue. So I think it is fairly significant, given that you have this comment coming from Congress and from someone as significant as Representative Engel.
But effectively, we have the U.S. now calling China a bully in this statement. And given recent sort of U.S. responses to China, how would you see the language of this statement?
Well, actually, it's interesting, the language, by referring to China needing to follow the rules and follow norms, it really reflects the messaging that we've heard from the Trump administration on the whole about how the U.S. is, in contrast to China, is following rules and has a vision for a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific region. So in that sense, Representative Engel's comments reflected the administration's broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think that that's quite significant, that you have language coming from members of Congress that reflects the executive, that reflects the White House. I think it shows just how important the U.S. government views this Indo-Pacific strategy and how much it views China as so much of a problem and a threat. I mean, you would never hear, or you would rarely hear a U.S. official say this publicly, but the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is really about providing balances and pushing back against China and upholding a U.S.-led vision for what the Indo-Pacific should look like. And of course, India is a country that the administration wants to enlist in that effort. It sees India as a key partner to push back against China.
So well, interestingly, of course, the counter view over here, Michael Kugelman, would be the fact that, the U.S. administration has been seeking to paint China in a particular light, and we've seen several instances of that. And should India let itself be drawn into that narrative necessarily?
Well, of course, and certainly the U.S. officials recognize that India and China have a complex but nonetheless workable relationship. Certainly it's in a lot of tension right now given the border spat. And I think that one thing that will have to be worked out in the coming months and coming years is to try to bridge that divide, that indeed the U.S. may want India to go further with helping the United States push back against China than India would like to do. Though my sense is that the Modi government has been more willing than its predecessor and previous Indian governments to work more closely with the U.S. than ever before in a defense and a security context. I'm not talking about some type of alliance that's going to be formed between the U.S. and India. I know that's not a friendly term in India, but I do think that the Modi government does appear to be willing to work more closely with the U.S., and particularly given the fact that Beijing has been engaging in many provocative actions, not just what's been happening at the border, But pushing out this Belt and Road Initiative is very concerning to India. The U.S. understands that and feels that there's going to be more grounds for convergence and partnership between the U.S. and India vis-a-vis the China problem.
Michael Kugelman, thanks very much indeed for joining us on Good Morning India and sharing your thoughts.